Hello and welcome to the Geeks Review. I'm Royce.
I'm Matt.
I'm Holly.
I'm Joshua.
And I'm Aaron.
On today's episode, I'll be reviewing the series Raised by Wolves and playing some previously unheard segments from past shows that were originally cut for time, like Aaron's short review of the Elton John biopic, Rocketman, and the musicals Sweeney Todd and Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. But first, this. Halloween is soon approaching, and while I don't celebrate it myself, it is a fun time of year to catch some scary movies. Back in March, Josh and I reviewed the original Friday the 13th and discussed some other notable horror films we had something to say about. I talked about Wes Craven's New Nightmare, a meta horror film featuring Freddy Krueger in the real world, haunting the stars of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, as well as Wes Craven's later horror film series Scream, a self-aware slasher movie featuring a whodunit murder mystery, as the anonymous Ghostface stalked the characters while taking inspiration from slasher films of old. Josh, meanwhile, highlighted a few films more under the radar, and all having a World War II twist. The first, a Russian war movie called White Tiger, about a Russian tank commander obsessively hunting an elusive and seemingly supernatural tank on the Western Front. His second, Frankenstein's Army, was a gory and demented, but from his description very fun, World War II horror film where Nazi experiments created horrific, stitched-together Frankenstein monsters. These are our next two reviews, and possibly some fun, scary movies you might like to track down for October 31st.
So, one of the three films, other than The Evil Dead, I looked into were all wartime horror films.
Oh yeah.
The first one being Overlord, directed by J.J. Abrams, released 2 years ago. It follows a group of American paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines hours ahead of the D-Day landings at Normandy. They are sent in, they gotta blow up a radio tower, make sure that air support can come over, yada yada yada. There you could just have it. It's a beat-for-beat war film. Something goes wrong, and then when it does go wrong, it slowly they find themselves in a village, an occupied village in the middle of France, and there's Germans running around and go, oh, it's occupied France,
Yeah.
But
World
then
War II.
you notice the uniforms, and you go, okay, they're the SS, they're the bad guys. And the people refuse to go out of their houses. They're afraid that they're going to be taken off to this castle. No surprise, it's another Nazi film with a castle. Can't escape it. And they allude to something dark is happening behind the curtains of the castle, that there's experiments happening, and I start to switch off. I found it hard to watch through this film a second time because you've got this serum, it turns them into these super soldiers. Granted, these guys can take a beating, and they eject one of the Americans with it to try and go, right, you're not going to die on us. And 5 minutes later, he's finally like, okay, cool, so it's just a revive serum. It's a video game mechanic. And he starts to feel odd, and he starts banging his head on this wooden pillar of this French home in the roof in the attic. And next thing you know, he breaks his neck. His collarbones popped out of his shoulders, and he's just
So very visceral.
Very visceral. And I'm like, whoa, you have my attention again. And he just cranks it back like nothing's happened. And you're just sitting there going, okay, what is this going to do if they manage to mass produce this? This is the horror element. This is what we are looking for. And then it just turns into a monster versus soldiers, generic gunfight, explode the castle, make sure no one finds this stuff ever again.
So very generic in that way.
Very generic. And directed by J.J. Abrams.
Was it though? Or was it something like he produced it probably, because he does have a producer hand in a lot of things. He's sort of like a modern Spielberg in that way.
I'm not exactly... When I looked at it, it said directed by J.J. Abrams. So, I might be wrong, but I expected more from this. This tried to do the theme of what had been around for the longest time, Nazi zombies, and I'm going to not sugarcoat it. It's been done better in the past. Things like Dead Snow, even old B films like Nazi Overlord and all that. I would say give it a watch if you're curious enough, but for me,
Not worth it.
not worth it. Not worth it again.
The Halloween horror series has a timeline more convoluted than a Dan Brown novel, but for the 20th anniversary with Jamie Lee Curtis returning to the series, the slate was wiped clean and this film became a sequel to the original and its sequel, which was begrudgingly written by John Carpenter, who then drunkenly came up with a twist that Michael Myers and the survivor, Laurie Strode, were long-lost siblings. So in this, Laurie has faked her death. She's now living as the dean of a prestigious high school in California with a son, and she's still living with this trauma from this event that happened 20 years before. Michael is seemingly back from the dead, no supernatural thing, no explanation as to how he escaped the end of Halloween 2.
He's just there.
He's back to kill her. And this was written, I think, by the same guy who did Scream. So these films were all connected. They all came out like 2 years apart from one another. They're all heavily influenced. There's even a scene where Scream 2 was playing on the screen. It also stars a young Josh Hartnett and Michelle Williams. This is a bit of a tidbit fact. A lot of people have criticised Josh Hartnett's hair that he has in this film. It's like this weird sort of bowl cut up the front and spiked at the back. And it turns out like he tried to go method with it. He went, teenagers do not look good. Teenagers, they're covered in zits and spots and they've got awkward hair growing in their face and hair sticking up all over the place. So while the production crew tried to make him look the best he could, as they do in all these sort of films of that time and era, he's like, no, teenagers don't look like that. So he'd go and mess up his hair deliberately between each takes and pull his like shirt out and make himself just look scruffed up and just look as much like a teenager as he possibly could. The film is a bit slow. It's quicker and it's shorter than the original, and it's more sort of soap opera-esque. There's a cameo from Janet Leigh, who is Jamie Lee Curtis's mother. Joseph Gordon-Levitt appears at the very beginning as a young teenager, and he gets a nice skate to the face. It's hilarious.
Huh.
Just jam it right in there. Michael is really... He's like a wild cat, like a big cat. The actor even said like he would growl when wearing the mask, when chasing them. He's relentless, like he just power walks everywhere. But there's something, even though he's not the most physically intimidating Michael we've had, because there's been multiple actors under that William Shatner mask, he is scary, and I think it's definitely one of the stronger entries in this series, which has, middling to bad to incomplete films. I mean, part 6 was, had to be reshot after Donald Pleasance, the original star, passed away, and entirely cut him and put young Paul Rudd, who was his first film, front and centre to deliver a lot of the exposition, which they'd rewritten. But I think Halloween H20, H20, horrible title, Halloween 20 years later, it's one of the better films, but I definitely recommend watching the original and the newest one, which came out in 2018.
Yeah. Halloween's got one of those very complicated histories, much like a lot of the juggernauts of the 80s.
Raised by Wolves is a 10-part sci-fi series available to stream in its entirety on Foxtel. Produced by Ridley Scott with some episodes directed by him as well, it's set in a future where Earth has been decimated by religious war and 2 androids called Mother and Father are sent far across the galaxy to a hospitable planet with human embryos and the intention of starting an atheist society. 13 years later, only one of the children remains, and things take an even more dramatic turn as religious soldiers from the Order show up with the intent of kidnapping the child. Episode 1 ends with Mother going on a rampage, and all parties involved finding themselves stranded on a new planet. The series was created by Aaron Guzikowski, best known for the Hugh Jackman film Prisoners and the Jason Momoa series The Red Road, but Raised by Wolves feels very much like a Ridley Scott film in visuals, themes and characters. The shots of the alien planet, played by the South African landscape, not only breathtaking and leave me uncertain as to whether they're 100% real or digitally enhanced, and they feel like they were ripped straight from Prometheus or Alien Covenant. Even the androids bleed a milky white substance like those played by Ian Holm, Lance Henriksen and Michael Fassbender. The visual elements I find interesting. There's a real mishmash of different styles and aesthetics that does feel like a variety of cultures really have clashed together. A combination of the old and new world brought together at once. Starting with the androids. Mother, played by Amanda Collin, looking very much like Annie Lennox from Eurythmics with her short red hair, and Father, played by Abu Bakr Salim, who video game fans might recognise as Bayek from Assassin's Creed Origins. Both are dressed in form-fitting silver spandex clothes, not unlike those you might catch in some old 50s sci-fi film. Their ship and helmets similarly sleek and unadorned with detail. Mother's Necromancer War Machine mode, a dark metallic T-posing form that flies through the air and uses high-pitched screams to destroy her enemies, still seems to take intentional design cues from those old films, with ridges along the head evoking 1927's Metropolis or C-3PO from Star Wars. The religious soldiers also strike a weird balance between the costumes seen in the upcoming Dune film, mixed together with the anachronistic, modern-styled 12th century costumes seen in the Taron Egerton starring Robin Hood film from a few years back. And most of the characters sport surprisingly trendy-looking mullets and hipster Viking beards. More importantly, these costumes tell a visual story over the episodes, becoming worn and ragged, blood-stained and marked, showing all the characters have been through over the course of the series. It must be said the series is gory, as most of these premium shows seem to be. Episode 1 ends in a bloodbath, but it doesn't quite revel in it as some shows tend to. The acting is pretty solid and to great across the board. Even most of the child actors were particularly impressive. Salim's work as father was perhaps my favourite, a cheerful android happy to help and try to cheer you up with a new joke he's thought up. Despite the show being a fairly out there concept, I found myself going along with and understanding it pretty clearly very early on, and becoming invested in the characters in moments that did legitimately catch me off guard, being anxious for and frustrated along with the characters rather than at them or at the show. That said, the series does feel a little stagnant at times, episodes ending in cliffhangers, rolling into one another, and largely taking place around the same locations that seem to get colder and greyer the more episodes go on. It makes it feel like an elongated movie, which does allow for the massive cast to get a chance to shine and develop, but does leave a lot of sitting around waiting for the next big thing to happen. But when the big thing does come, it sure is something. The central conflict of religion versus atheism is a tricky one that could easily cause controversy. Somewhat averted as the dominant Earth religion is a fictional, all-encompassing, sun-worshipping one, bearing little resemblance to any real religions, and gives the series even stronger ties to high fantasy evoked in their costumes and nature of the supernatural necromancer android. If you're a fan of science fiction and are looking for something new to check out, give it a watch. Even if you're not a science fiction fan, you might find it a little more accessible than, say, Game of Thrones, which had a massive fan base. Hopefully the ending to Raised by Wolves isn't as divisive. The series is available to stream on Foxtel. Up next, from our episode a few weeks ago where we discussed our least favourite movies, and as part of Matt's takedown of The Greatest Showman, this is Aaron's discussion of Rocketman, taking us into the review of Mamma Mia 2 and Sweeney Todd.
Don't make a movie unless you're absolutely sure of the story you want to tell.
This was a passion project for Hugh Jackman, wasn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a passion project, but he did keep trying to get it to happen. I'm not sure why. Why did he just want to play P.T. Barnum?
And not even honestly.
Yeah, it could have been... You could have just created an alternate world where some other dude created the circus.
And it had to be Barnum.
But you've also got to realize I'm pretty sure the estate of P.T. Barnum's still around.
Oh yeah, the museum.
Yeah,
there's
so
a museum
they
for his
probably
stuff.
would be leaning on that, much like how the household of the Wright brothers lean on the Smithsonian Museum in America, basically saying we only allow you to have the Wright flyer on display so long as you tell people that the Wright brothers actually were the first and only people to do manned flight.
So they weren't.
They weren't.
Oh.
No, they weren't.
Plenty of people during that time period who actually did self-propelled flight, motorized.
Wow.
So it's essentially Barnum's family is kind of breathing down Hugh Jackman's neck. You better
Would
not,
be breathing down the studios.
better not sully the name of our ancestor.
It's a similar problem that Bohemian Rhapsody suffers as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Like a lot of...
To then say that, like,
Vioxx.
Freddie Mercury was the only party animal in the band.
Yeah,
It's
and
like,
also
come on.
Brian,
Brian May...
yeah, Brian and Roger were producers on the film.
Yeah.
And they're angels in the movie.
Well, that explains a lot. I mean, what are they going to do? A bloody a Rolling Stones
Oh, God.
bio one, and suddenly,
Do a
Keith
Black
Richards is a
Sabbath
saint.
yeah, exactly.
With Rocketman, briefly. Has anyone seen Rocketman?
I haven't seen it yet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, just a quick question about Rocketman, because, that was really big on how Elton John was behind it. He was the main creative force, the producer, and Taron Egerton was singing. He wasn't lip-syncing or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be taking a slightly more honest approach, but that itself seems to be very controlled in what it presents, isn't it? Or is this...
Rocketman was a bit more psychedelic, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was... which is why I think Rocketman would translate very well to a stage adaptation, like a musical, because it is very it even starts in like an AA meeting that I don't know, it's like some social workers gathering that Elton John jumps into. And that's kind of the basis for him telling his story of his childhood up until that point.
Oh, yes.
And it's not saying that like it goes up to the point that he was in the social workers gathering. It's just a storytelling kind of framework, because as you see, he enters the thing wearing like the devil's outfit, and slowly as the film continues, he's like wearing less and less of the outfit, like his costumes are changing, and so it's kind of like a representation of his transformation over the course of his life. It's quite fascinating because he like delved deeply into drugs and, you know, nearly killed himself multiple times. And it's like very crazy. And it makes sense for a man who grew up as a rock and roll performer in like the 70s, you know, when he got brought into all the drugs and the partying, you're going to have a lot of psychedelic views on some of the performances.
Totally.
You know, like the alligator rock.
Crocodile
rock.
Alligator rock.
Alligator rock.
In another universe.
Crocodile rock. Seeing like everyone's like floating as he's playing the piano, and the directors even said, "Oh, we need to represent, you know, the feeling of that in the film as opposed to just doing a live performance."
Yeah, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
Oh, it's amazing.
I can understand why a lot of people find musicals impenetrable. I was kind of born into a musical family, so I love them from the start. But I can understand why the idea of watching a story that gets interrupted, like people can see it as a story getting interrupted by a song and dance, and that can annoy some people. Like I talked a few weeks ago about The Greatest Showman. Story is often interrupted, so there can be a pop song. But yes, a good musical, the songs will move the story.
And the audience.
Yeah.
Like Mamma Mia,
Poetry,
here we go again.
Yes, very quickly want to touch upon that. So Mamma Mia was a jukebox musical using the music of ABBA. It was on Broadway, it was a big thing. And it became a movie in 2008 with Meryl Streep, Amanda Seyfried, and, you know, Pierce Brosnan, Stellan Skarsgård, and Colin Firth, Christine Baranski, basically the whole cast.
Just everyone.
It's a fun movie, and I enjoyed it back in the day. And, you know, it was really my first exposure to ABBA, and sort of the creation of many fantastic, wonderful radio plays came from that. And Yetta, basically, is where that came from. Spoilers.
What?
But Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again is a completely original sequel directed by Ol Parker, and it's an interesting film, which is both a sequel and a prequel. So you're dealing with Meryl Streep's character, Donna, as a young woman played by Lily James. And it's mostly set in the 70s and all that. And it is just so surprisingly well done, I think, in regards to what you could do with pre-existing songs to try and get emotion and wrap a story around it and integrate them in a naturalistic way that feels like it really works, and you get emotion out of the song. And the camera work as well, and the production and the performances. I mean, I was like, Lily James looks nothing like Meryl Streep, but then she opened her mouth and you're like, okay, don't need to worry.
Yeah,
she
you're like,
sounds
oh,
the part.
she's Meryl Streep, okay.
Yeah, it works. And the young actors they have as well playing the younger guys, and everyone as well, is just spot on.
Special shout out to the guy who played young Harry.
Yes.
Who is basically a Matt Smith looking knockoff, and I love him. He was very talented.
Yes.
And the girl who plays the young Tanya, she was actually the first Heather Chandler on the off-Broadway production of Heathers the Musical.
Yes. Yeah,
which, if you're into actual musical theatre on stage, I would recommend finding a illegal version of it.
A bootleg is what they
There's
call
no
them.
recorded version of it, so there are clips of it that are bootlegged.
Yes.
So.
And as well, just very quickly, sorry, Harry.
Also good.
Mamma Mia 2, here we go again. Also, sorry, Mamma Mia makes the best of who they have. So Pierce Brosnan does his best in the first one, trying to sing, does about as well as I did when I was in Rocky Horror. I'll get to that in a sec. Yeah, he's not a very strong singer. What was the song he sung? SOS?
SOS. When you're gone. That's what he does, because he tries to push it.
Yeah. But the second one just uses him in such a good way.
The reprise.
The reprise made me cry.
Yeah, it is such...
Genuinely
an emotional, well done bit.
It's
And
amazing.
they chose to do something really smart, which was to record him live.
Yes.
So it's very obviously live, so it doesn't matter whether
And
he's not
they
awesome.
slowed it down and took it down
it
the
down,
octave. So
and
he's
then-
basically speaking it.
And he's singing to himself, essentially. That's,
It's beautiful.
yeah, it's surprising, and it was really intelligently done. And then they just drown him out with the ensemble.
And also,
And
a good point about Mamma Mia 2 is that Meryl Streep doesn't do sequels. There's a reason why her character, spoiler alert, is killed off in the second one. And so they don't actually have her. But she never does sequels. She refuses. She came back.
if
This
only
is
for
the
one
first
thing.
time she's come back for a sequel.
Oh, really?
She comes
Wow.
back at the very, very end and does a really beautiful piece with Amanda Seyfried, which is stunning. Because
Yeah.
no one was expecting to see her.
No.
And then all of a sudden you turn around and she's like, hello!
Well, it's
I'm
like
back.
she was going to be in it, but she had like scheduling conflicts.
conflicts. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which-
it was
But it makes for a
really
much more emotional.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
And if we're going to continue with our theme of celebrities being shoved into movie musicals, Cher did not need to be in that film.
But
Fernando.
I'm not complaining.
I am complaining.
Fernando, though.
No, I hated it. I'm sorry. Like, it was... Because, like, Mamma Mia... A lot of people think the Mamma Mia story is garbage. And for the most part, it's very thin. But I love the idea, you know, that it doesn't matter who your dad is as long as you love them. That kind of thing. Like, that's beautiful. But the second one, because it wasn't adapted from a stage show that kind of sucked, the second one was a whole new story.
It's
and
a
it
retcon,
was,
massive retcon.
and it was actually like a very beautiful story, the second film. But then they just shove Cher in there, and I don't care about her, and she's annoying.
My
and
favourite part is that she plays Meryl Streep's mum when she's only 3 years older than Meryl Streep in real life, and it's like,
Yeah.
is that an insult to Cher, or is that
And I wouldn't have minded.
a compliment?
I wouldn't have minded perhaps Cher making like I guess you could say it's a cameo, but it goes for 10 minutes. But she's just in there too long, and she's too annoying.
But
when-
Fernando
Yeah.
was beautiful.
When they incorporated that, the cinema I was in, everyone was like, "Of course, that's how they're gonna do it, right?" It's also a weird one because it's only set a year after the original movie, but it's made
Yeah.
10 years after the fact, and everyone kind of looks the same.
Yeah.
It's only set a year later.
It is, yeah.
It's,
like,
no, it's set 5 years in the future, I believe.
okay.
Yeah.
Because it's very strange. The first film was made in 2008, and it feels very 2008. But Sophie says she's 20, and the second film, the prequel, is set in 1979 when Donna gets pregnant. So Sophie was born in 1980, which means the first film is set in 2000, which means Here We Go Again is 2005.
Yeah, so I think she says she's 25 in the second one.
Right. It's just weird. I guess because, the Broadway musical was set, came out many years before and then
It was in the
Yeah.
90s. Yeah.
Right.
It's
Gosh,
weird.
Let Aaron talk about Sweeney Todd.
Sorry.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. You talk about Sweeney Todd.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah. I was prepared to just end it, but
Oh, if you don't have anything... But it's probably too much for Royce to cut through then, so if you don't really have anything more to say...
yeah, I don't want to.
Also, don't end it. Your life is worth living.
Basically, Sweeney Todd sum up is Sweeney Todd, better than everyone says, stop ragging on the
pretty
two
good.
leads because they do a great job.
Johnny
Go
Depp
away.
is good.
Yeah, it's good.
Just because he doesn't fit the original Broadway sound recording doesn't mean he's not good. Exactly the same as Into the Woods. Johnny Depp is good, okay?
My only issue with Sweeney Todd though is they don't have the Tale of Sweeney Todd.
You've heard Tim
Yeah.
Burton's justification for that.
I think I have.
He's like, why listen to a song about attending the Tale of Sweeney Todd when
you
I can
can
just do it?
I mean, you can just show it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get. Yeah, but they do have it in the instrumental. in
It
the
could have
opening
been like
credits.
it's over the title sequence, so
Yeah.
they could have done a creative choreographed title sequence with lyrics, and
Yeah.
that way it wouldn't have been wasting time, and there would have been time for the
Also-
credits anyway.
Sweeney Todd is not it's not the first performance that Johnny Depp does where he sings on screen. Just putting that out there, everyone thinks it is, but he was in Crybaby. And he sings, there's a particular song in Crybaby that he sings, and he does a good job. So anyone else saying that Sweeney Todd was his first musical performance and, he's bad, no. Go educate yourselves. Anyway,
Well, does that wrap up this week's episode of the Geeks Review?
I hope so. We'll be back next week. Tune in for that. I'm Royce.
I'm Matt.
I'm Holly.
And I'm Aaron.
And we'll see you next week.